brother had died. And when he went into the house, his uncle was there, but not really surprised. And when the nephew asked him why he wasn't surprised to hear of his brother's death, he said, and pointed to all the clocks. The clock on the mantelpiece stopped at 3:15 a.m. There was a blinking LED clock which had 3:15 on it. His watch had stopped at 3:15. All the clocks had stopped at 3:15. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, and again, that's the beauty of this, is that then you also think about this as a scientist. Is there any way to explain that as a scientist?
No, you have to again say that there is an interconnectedness between people and what they and the things that they own, or that in some way that they can affect what other people who they're attached to own. So it seems to spread out just from the person himself to what they own, and hence the clock stopping like that. It's a very meaningful thing, obviously, to have your clock stop at the time that your brother dies.
And so that would bring us to kind of a discussion of the release of energy or something at the time of death.
Yes, and there we have some fascinating phenomena. The first one that I think is, to me, is important is light surrounding the body at the time of death. If people enter the light, in other words, if the light shines on them, then it's always composed of compassion, love, and joy. So there's this feeling of joy and love, and sometimes light at the moment of death. The next thing is that people see shapes leaving the body, and these have a very specific form. It's not what we think of as sort of ghosts, but it is what we think of in terms of mists. And so people describe the moment of death a haze-like shimmering as something seems to leave. Other people describe it as smoke. Other people describe it as sparks, and then, of course, other people as light. And if you take those phenomena that I've said, they're very, very close to those that are described by the Dalai Lama in the Tibetan way of thinking of death. And it seems as if there is a cross-correspondence between what people of the dying see and what people who are watching the dying, that is, and what the Tibetans say. And the way that I think of this is that as not everybody sees them who's surrounding the body at the moment of death, I think possibly that it may be a sort of sharing of what is going on within the dying person at the time of death. It's difficult to formulate it, but if you formulate it that way, then you can see how the Dalai Lama's account and what we see in our culture are very similar.
Well, okay, but as a scientist, as a neuropsychologist, is there a metabolic process at the moment of death that might account for this release of energy or this mist or anything else that would tie the physical that we can measure with the metaphysical that we experience?
I think this is a difficult one because if one is talking about the moment of death or around the moment of death, there are, of course, a whole lot of energetic processes which start to run down. As soon as the heart stops and respiration stops, then in 11 seconds, brain function stops. And with that, of course, you lose all your life support systems, and the body starts to move towards death, which it will achieve, or it will be irreversible, in about 5 minutes, completely irreversible. And you then get a whole set of biochemical processes, those that maintain the cell walls, those that maintain the actual structures within the cell, that they all will start to run down. So that there is a huge energy change within the body. Now, whether you can argue that some of these are related to that or not, I don't know. My own feeling is that this is probably more psychological than it is physiological, but we don't know yet. We need more evidence.
How would you relate that which you've been studying and the thing that you just described right there with the accounts of children, for example, who drowned underneath the ice under frozen conditions and are brought back, an hour afterward or 20, 25, 30 minutes after being pronounced dead because the body was so cold that somehow life was preserved even though the heart itself had stopped?
I think this one is pretty well understood now, and that is that the metabolic requirements of the brain and the tissues decrease as you cool them. And this is why when you're doing either brain surgery or heart surgery, you cool the body so as to reduce the amount of oxygen that you need to provide to the tissues to keep them alive. So if you are under the ice, then you're cooled right down to almost freezing. The metabolic needs of the body are very much lower, so you can survive for long periods and be resuscitated again.
Well, what about what the person experienced in that time that they were then frozen in that state?
Well, you do get a number of people who have near-death experiences, and when they recover from drownings like that, they do have near-death experiences. And I think it's just worth talking about this because we're now coming on to the next question. We've talked a little bit about all the phenomena that occur at the time of death, but do remind me to tell you about other strange things that happen as you die.
Yeah, about animals and stuff,
yeah,
too.
Okay.
Right.
But we'll come on to that. But let's just deal now with what actually happens when your heart stops, your respiration stops, and you actually start the dying process and will never come back again. Well, we have one model for that we're looking at, and that is what happens in cardiac arrest. In other words, here you get the three cardinal signs of death, which is no respiration, no pulse, and all the brain stress stem and life support reflexes are down. Now, in this state, if you study it, 10% of people will have near-death experiences. Now, the near-death experiences are not totally different from those that other people have reported before. There have been 4 studies on this, and ours was, in fact, the first one with my coworker was Sam Parnia, and he's been in the news recently with an extended study of this. And what we found was that these people whose brains were not functioning, and the heart and respiration weren't functioning, obviously, had an out-of-body experience where they saw the resuscitation process, and then they had a normal near-death experience. And so we argue that if one can be absolutely certain that these did happen at that time, in other words, when you had no heart, etc., then this is probably a good model for the beginnings of the death process itself. And this, to some extent, goes in with what the dying say they're going towards, which is a wonderful area with compassion, love, and light. And that's just what the people with near-death experiences say. So I think probably you needn't be too afraid when you're going to die.
Does that bring us naturally to a discussion of what is a good death?
Yep. Yes, it's slightly moved. Can I just tell you about animals? Because I know we'll forget them.
Well, and I if I promised you we won't forget them, because I know we're going to hear that from people who are calling in, which is
okay.
I'm quite certain what we'll hear is a variety of the stories that you've already collected, but in first-person form coming up on the phones. But
I made lovely.
I made a big note for myself because I'm fascinated by the dog thing too. But
okay.
let's talk about it, because I thought there was such an interesting diversion in your book into a good death.
A good death is really what this book is about. It's telling us that there is a process to dying. If you listen to a scientist, what they say is that death is just a switching off. It's not really of any interest to us. doctors consider it a failure, and so if you're going to die, they will either strive beyond all reasonable ways to keep you alive,